nini tumegundua, lakini pia tutazungumza katika historia yetu ya Zanzibar. Na kwa kuwa leo Mark anaondoka leo usiku, nimetaka kumuomba tuje studio ili yale atakayoyasema na watu wapate kuyasikia na kuyafahamu. Kwa nini nimemtaka leo Mark au Professor Mark Horton aje hapa studio. So, Mark, how are you?
Hi, great to be here.
How was your day today?
Oh, very exhausting because it was the last day of the dig,
right?
And we've had to put all the soil back in again.
Good. So, for the sake of the viewers, may I ask you first to introduce yourself, who you are, and where you've been working, okay, and how long you've been coming to Zanzibar.
So yes, so my name is Mark Horton. I'm the Professor of Archaeology at the Royal Agricultural University in the UK, and I've been working here in Zanzibar since 1984.
1984?
I first came here at the invitation of the father of the present president, who had just assumed office here, and there was a need to make a record of all the heritage of Zanzibar, right. All the standing ruins, the mosques, the ancient cities that were known about. So we came in 1984 to do a survey, and then I've carried on coming back some years, every year since then.
And let me ask, how many areas and places that you have worked in Zanzibar, which particular areas in terms of the archaeological side? I've heard that you've worked in Unguja, Pujini. So tell us more about these areas.
So yes, so I've worked in practically every site, archaeological site in Zanzibar and in Pemba. So starting up in the north at Makangali Cave, Musukunjini, Twaka, Kichakotwe, Mandani, Wete, Tamwimku, Rasunkumbu, and then moving down in Zanzibar, Fukuchani, Umvaleni, Tumbatu, Nkokotoni.
That's amazing. We should give
I should carry on if you want. Zanzibar, Shangani Stone Town, Unguja Kizimkazi, Kumbi Cave.
There's a particular interest with in terms of findings and the history of Unguja and the Shirazis. Tell us more with regard to the Shirazis. What happened in Unguja? Who lived there and when?
Well, we've done really scientific studies for many years at Unguja. It is probably the most important archaeological site on Zanzibar. And it dates to maybe 650 or 700 Christian era. So that's shortly after the time of the Prophet Muhammad. And it is mentioned in many Arab sources as the main trading place that the monsoon-driven dhows would come from the Gulf to Africa, particularly in looking for ivory, which they could then take back, and then was then put on the ships to trade to China. So the Muslims in the Middle East wanted all the luxuries of China, the Chinese pottery, porcelain, lacquer wood, but they needed a commodity. So they came here to Zanzibar to get the ivory that they could then trade with the Chinese.
So, Unguja, who came first? Were they the Bantus that arrived towards the Unguja island, or were they Shirazis? So how do we know, how to differentiate between the two?
So it's very complicated and very political.
Right.
We think that the origins of Swahili civilization is Bantu.
Okay.
Swahili is a Bantu language, very similar to many other groups who are non-Muslims. The Swahili become Muslim. And our studies along the coast have shown that these early Bantu villages on the coast became converted to Islam, maybe in the 8th or early 9th century. So these are not the Shirazis, these are local people who become Islamic, who become Muslims and converted. And maybe the reason for that is there was a slave trade, and if you're a good Muslim, you cannot get enslaved. So there's a good incentive for people to want to accommodate, to become Muslims. And we think that maybe the Shirazis come a little bit later. So the evidence is very new, genetic evidence from burials along the coast that suggests that the Shirazis arrive around 1000 AD, about 1000 years ago. And this may coincide with the earthquake that happened in Siraf, which was the main place where these ships from the Gulf were coming to Zanzibar. And there was a big earthquake there. and many of the merchants fled. And we think that some of the merchants came here. Shiraz and Siraf, they're very close together, so they would claim to be Shirazi identities. They probably came here around 980 or 1000, and then intermingled with the already existing Bantu Muslims.
What was the particular interest of the Shirazis to come towards further south, and having arrived to the coast of East Africa and Unguja and Zanzibar in general?
Here we think Africa, this East African coast, was very full of very high precious items. So I can mention a few. We've already mentioned ivory, for example. Another one is rock crystal. Now, there was a very active trade in rock crystal from Madagascar up to Zanzibar. And these rock crystal pieces were then carved into magnificent pieces in the Fatimid courts and the Abbasid courts. They were looking for many other things, minerals, copper, iron, but also mundane things. So mangrove poles, for example, there was very little wood in the Middle East. And so they were going to the deltas, the refugee delta, and to the mainland, cutting mangrove poles and taking them back to build great cities like Baghdad or Samarra.
Let's talk a little bit about the findings.
Yes.
What we've been telling the people of Zanzibar and Tanzania and the rest of the world, that Stone Town, which is the World Heritage Site, we know that we had the Arabs came in the 18th century, if not mistaken.
That's correct.
Yeah, and then we had the Portuguese in the 17th century. Now, something was missing. Who lived in Stone Town before the 15th century? And what did you discover this time? So can you just elaborate and explain to us, tell the people, why are we so excited? Why is our ministry so excited? Why are we all so happy? What has happened?
Well, it is really exciting because underneath the Portuguese levels is another 2 meters of archaeology. So how archaeological sites develop is people throw away their rubbish and their trash and they build on top, and then they throw away their rubbish and they build, so layer by layer by layer. And we reckon around 30 centimeters for each century is accumulated on a site. So we've got down 2 meters, 2.5 meters below the Portuguese levels, right down to the seashore, the beach, on which the...
Wait a second, Mark. Are you telling us that the beach used to be all the way in Ngome the old fort inside?
Absolutely, in the middle of Ngome. And in fact, we have layers on the beach. In our excavations we have sand, rubbish, sand, rubbish, sand, rubbish. As if there's a very big high tide or storm that brings the sand in, then they put their rubbish on the beach, and then there's another storm, like a series of layers, like you find.
So tell us the first time, when you went down, what did you discover first? I saw there were some metals. What was that?
So the metals are really boring. Well, not really, if you're an industrial archaeologist. Because the metals were all from the Bububu Railway.
Bububu Railway. Which was?
In 1904 to about 1912 when it was taken up. It had a very short life.
That was the workshop?
This is the workshop and the terminus, the railway station. So the railway station was in half the fort, and the gatehouse built by Said Said was completely knocked down, and the trains would come in and out of the fort. So that was, and then behind was the workshops where the engines were looked after. A lot of iron.
So let's go towards the wall of the old fort, the cathedral, and the findings, and what does it tell you? How do you know that there was life in Stone Town 1,000 years ago? I think this is what we said. Let's start with the cathedral.
Let's start with the... So underneath, it is very good because the fort area is an open area to excavate. So if we did an excavation in the Stone Town, there were many layers of houses and things. People don't have many gardens. There are not many open spaces. But the fort represents a big open space. And so our idea was to do an excavation down through the Arab levels, the Bubu Railway levels, right down before the Portuguese, to see whether the Portuguese came to an empty site It was just beach.
What century was that?
So Portuguese came here in the late 16th century.
It's okay.
They came here first in 1502 and sailed away.
But then Vasco da Gama had sailed around 1498.
1498.
And did he build any chapel around?
No.
Nothing.
He sailed straight past.
Through Zanzibar?
Through Zanzibar, that's correct.
Okay. All right.
But he did build a small chapel, or a little bit later, the Portuguese built a chapel in Malindi.
Okay.
In the early 16th century, and that chapel still survives to this day.
Is that one of the oldest chapels?
Yeah, one of the oldest little, but it's very small. It's smaller than this studio.
Okay. So tell us about the cathedral in the Old Fort.
Okay, so the cathedral in the Old Fort, we have a little bit of documentary evidence that the Portuguese first built a chapel,
right,
and then there's a papal bull for Augustinian mission.
Right.
The Augustinians is an order of monks, of priests, whose principal aim was to convert people to Christianity.
Okay.
And so the Portuguese thought that if they came here, the way that they could control East Africa was to convert the local people to Christianity and abandon Islam. Completely. And so they invested huge amounts of their wealth from all their empires to building these very large missions. We have examples in India, for example, in Goa. But here, it was a mystery. We have a small reference to this mission in Zanzibar. But then, when we excavate, it is this enormous cathedral-like church, only slightly smaller than some of the magnificent World Heritage churches in Goa, in India.
So this church was not small?
It was huge.
Okay.
It was nearly 50 meters in length and nearly 25 meters wide. It was almost square. It was cruciform. And it represents the whole of the north wall of the fort. Is the nave and transepts of that cathedral.
How do you know that was the wall of the church?
Well,
did you see something?
Yes, we saw something. So we are archaeologists, so we try to work out how the different layers of wall work together. And in the wall of that church, there are windows. There are 4 windows. And if it was a fort, would you have big windows in the fort?
Not really.
Not really, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
So these windows, and in fact, even one of the Portuguese window frames survives in the side. And so the window frames and the walls were then reused by the Arabs when they converted it to a fort in the 18th century.
So when the Arabs came, they built on top of the walls of the church that was built?
That's right.
Okay.
And we even have a documentary reference to a British ship that passed by in 1711, HMS Speaker, which said, and they said that there was a miserable little Arab fort perched on the roof of the ruined Portuguese church. And that is exactly what we have today.
Okay. So the findings that you've had, what we saw, the pottery, the remains of the bodies that we discussed, skeleton. Can you tell us, before the Portuguese, what was there and what happened, and is it a prediction, and how do you actually determine there's a linkages between Unguja Ukuu and Shangani, the Old Fort, and the people who lived?
That's the 3 questions there. First of all, we should explain the bodies. Okay. So in Islamic tradition, people are buried in cemeteries, and then very rarely buried inside the mosque. Whereas in the Christian tradition, people are often buried inside the church, especially the special people. They also have cemeteries outside, but what we are finding is we excavated 11 burials in a very small area, and we're convinced that there's probably 20 or 30 more underneath where we were excavating. So, and that was just a small part of the church. So the church is completely full of what might be 100, 200, 300 burials in that place. And it's very interesting that some are men and some are women, which they could be the priests and the nuns that came from Portugal, but we're also finding children in there, also finding a baby that was stillborn. So it raises the question, if they were priests and nuns, why are there children? So I'm pretty convinced that some of these people buried were also Swahili, who were converted to Christianity and were buried there. So that's the burial story.
Yeah.
There's also another part to the burial story. Some of them have been put into graves really quickly and really roughly.
Right.
And we know that there was a conflict between the Arabs and the Portuguese.
That took place?
It took in 1650.
Okay.
And we know historically that the priest, the vicar, and the congregation were killed in this conflict. So it is possible that some of these remains that we find have been put very quickly and rapidly under the floor of their big church.
Okay. So tell us, what happened? Okay, so the Portuguese came, but there was life
beforehand.
Before the Portuguese arrived on the coast. And this is where there's always been a missing link, a gap between the 10th century and the 15th or prior to that.
That's right.
So how do we know that Stone Town, or the main town of Zanzibar town, there was life and people were living here?
Yeah, well, because we then, underneath these Portuguese levels,
Right.
we find nearly 2 meters
So are you saying
of occupation.
that every time you go below,
You're an earlier period.
you're an early period?
It's like a cake.
Like a cake.
Cake
so
of
you go up
layers.
here, 100 years. Farther down below, 300
200
years.
years.
So the lower you go,
The earlier you
the
are.
earlier you are.
And you can date that exactly because of the pottery that you find in each of these layers.
Okay.
So we have pottery in the top layers that dates, it's called Persian blue speckled ware. It comes from the Persian Iranian area, and we know that dates to the 15th century.
Okay.
We also find Celadon pottery, Lung Chuang Celadon from China, that also dates to the 16th, 15th centuries. And then under that again, we get pottery from the Yemen,
Okay.
probably from the 14th century.
Okay.
And under that again we have pottery again from Iran of the 13th century. And the oldest pottery we find at the very bottom is beautiful sgraffiato pottery. This is pottery which has been
You
made.
found it in Zanzibar, in Stone Town?
Yes, hundreds of sherds.
Right.
2 meters down,
Right.
below the ground level, is this sgraffiato pottery decorated with floret Kufic inscriptions on it, all lovely pseudo Kufic, and is found deep buried down the bottom. And so we know, and only that pottery, so we know that that is 1000 or maybe 950 Christian era.
From where?
950.
But where did it come from?
Comes from Iran.
Iran.
Or more precisely, Baluchistan
Ah.
and the Makran.
Where is Baluchistan?
It's the area, the southern Iranian coast, on the Indian Ocean side.
That's where the
Not
Baluchi-
inside. That's where the Baluchi come from.
Okay.
So not so the area from not in the Gulf, but the Indian Ocean shore of Iran.
Now, the interesting part is when we were discussing in my office and at the site, you did mention that the pottery that we have discovered in the old fort has some resemblance, the one in Gujoku. What does this mean?
Okay, so at Ungujuku we have a different type of pottery generally that comes, it's called turquoise glaze. It has a beautiful turquoise colour, and it was probably for trading date wine. They were drinking a lot of date wine, even though they were Muslims.
Yeah.
This was being brought from the Gulf, and we have this turquoise glaze ware. We have 4 sherds only from the fort, and it dies out around 1000 AD. So that's a good evidence. But at Ungujuku, we find virtually no of this sgraffiato pottery.
Right.
So my theory is that Ungujuku is being occupied until around 1000,
Okay.
and then the people move from Ungujuku to Shangani, to Old Stone Town.
So people moved from Ungujoku to Shangani.
That's right.
But why?
Well, it is interesting.
Okay, so you need to do more work.
We need to do more work. But Shangani is a much better harbour.
Right,
As the ships are getting bigger,
right.
the problem with Ungujuku is it dries out
The
for a
water.
long time, long way. Whereas Shangani is ideal, and also the point is such that you can anchor boats on both sides, both monsoons.
Right,
So you get protection on one side and protection
right.
on the
The
other.
Malindi side and the Shangani side.
Shangani side.
Which we are still using it till
Still,
today.
absolutely.
Okay, that makes sense. And I think you've made a very important point there. But this pottery that you have discovered, or we, along with our team in Ungujoku, Shangani, and other parts, what does it mean historically, Zanzibar? What were the Zanzibaris or the people who were coming to Zanzibar trading on with this 1,000 years ago? I mean, what is your theory now? What do you know?
Well, they were trading mangrove poles and ivory,
Right.
and maybe some slaves.
Right.
But also they were probably trading food as well.
Right.
We know in the Portuguese period that Pemba, for example, is
Right.
a massive supplier of food to Mombasa.
Right.
So maybe we have archaeological evidence for rice being grown here.
Right.
So maybe they're growing rice and other things as well. And also this is an important stopping off point. So that here, this is the easiest place to get to on the monsoon.
Right.
If you're getting commodities from southern Africa, and by the 11th, 12th century, the gold mines of Great Zimbabwe
Right.
are now beginning to operate.
Right.
So it is likely that the Zanzibari merchants were trading with Mozambique
Right.
and with Zimbabwe, and were bringing the gold from southern Africa,
Right.
and then were then trading them here on Zanzibar and Pemba.
Good. So okay, fine. I think because of time, we've been discussing more about Stone Town. So what is your recommendations to our government in terms of what we have discovered? Do you think it would be ideal to have a museum in the old fort?
Yes, I think that the old fort has so much
To
about
offer.
the history of Zanzibar, all in one place.
Right.
So it's not just the history of the Arab stone fort, it's the history of the Portuguese, it's the history of the earliest inhabitants.
Right.
And we've made many wonderful finds,
Right.
many coins, a very fine little brass ring the other day, many
gold?
objects.
Any gold?
No, not yet. I wouldn't tell you. Not on air.
You should whisper that to me.
We should whisper later. But yes, there were many finds.
Right.
And it would be really wonderful. One of the towers is unused and ruined at the moment. So wouldn't it be good to have an old fort museum there?
Right.
And to be able to maybe charge tourists to come and visit it properly.
They're getting in for free now.
They're getting in for free. Thousands every day.
They're walking in the main gate, coming out
The side gate,
the side gate,
as if it's the route that they take through the town.
Okay, we'll take that into because I think Mariam, the director, and our peers have been discussing about perhaps having a small museum in the old fort and create more jobs for tour guides,
Yes.
make it more interesting. But of course, when you do have a museum, the quality also must be good.
Good, yes.
So I think we'll...
So we're working, the sponsors of this project is New York University Abu Dhabi.
Right.
And they have a specialist heritage and museum department.
Right.
So I hope that they can advise
Right.
on the highest international standards for a new museum.
Yeah, okay,
Which would be wonderful.
That'll be great assistance. We need that. And I think it's important as well, what you've suggested earlier, to get more for a team to be able, well, to increase their knowledge and education, but to be able to participate in these excavations that are taking place in different parts of the world. So hopefully they can learn more.
So we've had students from Susa who have
yes.
been with us for 2 weeks, who have learned a lot about real archaeology during our project in the old fort.
Right, so we are coming towards the end, and what's your message? I mean, in terms of, meaning is, you've done a lot of work between these two islands, Unguja and Pemba. What's your most, I mean, you enjoyed or you loved the most? Which area really you love digging?
Oh, well, all. Archaeologists often like to dig the earliest, find the earliest, but the thing about Zanzibar, it is fascinating in all the periods, even the Boo Railway.
It's only 100 years ago.
But this is the most amazing place.
Right.
And, you know, I would rank Zanzibar up there with all the other famous places in Africa,
Right.
whether it's Timbuktu or Great Zimbabwe or Lalibela or Aksum. You know, it has to be, if you understand the history of Africa, you have to come to Zanzibar.
I've always used that line. And what about Unguja?
Well, Unguja is a bit of a problem because there's not much to see. The archaeology is buried below, and there's been a lot of development along the waterfront there.
Where?
Along the place, along the most ancient part of the site. Hotels, 2 hotels, have been built there, and they've been very destructive to the archaeology there.
Right.
And the only area that the public can come to is a very small area now.
Right.
And there's a museum that we've helped to refurbish,
Right.
on the beach there,
Right.
which is also helps tourists as well. But
Right.
otherwise, there's not much to see. But I think we have to tell the story much more strongly,
Yes.
and maybe do some display real archaeology. There's a mosque, for example, that we
Right.
could expose.
Right. Well, let me see if we've had any messages since I'm the presenter today.
The social media.
Well, someone here with the telephone number, he says, "Good job. I need the name of that professor."
Mark Horton.
The Faida with the site. Someone has sent a message. Is they want to benefit from the site. Another one, he's saying, "Huyo mtafiti, we want you to come somewhere in the Chato, the region, the mainland, maybe to."
Yes,
I don't know
yes,
what he
yes.
meant by this. I think some of them they go to God. Okay, so we've only had 6 messages, but the other ones
Are coming.
are coming through. No, there's been a lot of phone calls because the phone is on silent. I'm not sure how much time we have, but we'll give it the last 5 minutes. So what's your message, Mark, to Zanzibar, government, Tanzania, to the people of Zanzibar, in terms of our history?
I know, Minister, that you want to improve the tourist offering here on Zanzibar.
Right.
To improve people's understanding of the history, to have people who are more interested in the history and culture, rather than just the sun and the beaches. You have here an amazing resource.
Right.
Not just in El Fort, but many sites, ruined sites throughout Zanzibar and Pemba.
Right.
We haven't even mentioned Tumbatu, for example, where there's a complete ruined city, all surviving. A complete ruined city. We've worked there. It is an incredible place.
Okay, we have a telephone number. Hello, habari yako? Hang on, hang on. Yeah, habari yako? Oh, he disconnected. Let's see, go.
Doesn't want to be on live.
Right.
So you have this incredible heritage resource, but it requires a little bit of investment to make it up to modern standards, signage, roads, car parks, those kind of things that people
Director
can visit.
Mariam told me we have more than 85 sites in Unguja and Pemba.
Well, that's small, maybe more.
Maybe more.
Maybe more.
Well, Mark, we, on behalf of our ministry and the government of Zanzibar, would like to thank you for coming to Zanzibar, for all the good work that you've done, but also the interest and love that you have for Zanzibar. It's really wonderful, and you can feel it when you're at the fort working. So thank you so much for coming to the studio at ZBC. Ndugu watazamaji na wasikilizaji, hapa tutafikia mwisho wa kipindi chetu. Kama nilivyosema mwanzo, tunaomba radhi kwa sababu tumekuwa tunatumia lugha ya Kiingereza kwa sababu Mark anaondoka leo usiku, na nitaka aje ayaseme tuweze kurekodi yale ambayo ameagundua, na pia kuzungumza na Wazanzibari pia na watu wengine waweze kumsikia. Lakini kubwa zaidi kama nilivyosema awali kwamba tumeomba ndugu zetu wa ZBC watafanya subtitles, yani maandishi yale ya chini kwa lugha ya Kiswahili kwa muda ambao utakuwa mwafaka, ili sote tuweze kusikia, na naamini kwamba watakuwa nakirudia kipindi hiki kwa sababu masuala ya historia na arkeolojia ni jambo muhimu katika maisha yetu. Baada ya hapo, nachukua nafasi na kushukuru Mark, kama tunapotakiwa kusema kuwakumbushia ndugu zetu. Kwanza tuna swala zima la sensa tarehe 23, na ni vyema sote tukashirikiana kwa pamoja kuweza kushiriki katika zoezi zima la sensa Agosti tarehe 23. Mimi niko tayari kuhesabiwa, na wewe pia tunakuomba na jirani zako na rafiki zako uambie. Baada hapo nakushukuru sana. Asanteni sana kunisikiliza. Asanteni ZBC kwa kutualika.